MedTech founders very often hit a brutal gap. They have a prototype that works, but no FDA clearance, and investors won't touch it until they get that clearance. This is the Top Decile Podcast. I'm Connor Sattely with Decile Group, and today's guest built an 800-plus person network before she ever wrote a check, and she's now using that network to build a fund and close that gap. My guest today holds a PhD in biochemistry from Ohio State and a master's in biotech entrepreneurship from Case Western. She's advised over 150 MedTech startups. 5 of them went to raise $50 million or more, and 3 of them exited. That track record became Amplify MedTech, an 800-plus member network of founders, clinicians, and academics that now will source most of her deal flow. Fay Ventures is her $1 million seed fund backing US AI-enabled MedTech founders in the gap between working prototype and FDA clearance. Very happy to welcome Fehmida Kapadia. Fehmida, welcome.
Thank you, Connor. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, it's really my honor. So you built this amazing network years before you built the fund. So I want to focus on that FDA clearance gap between prototype and getting the official okay from the government to start distributing it. Tell me about that gap and what convinced you that trying to bridge that gap could be effective and helpful for founders.
Yeah, absolutely. So, when startups start in the medtech space, especially, we're talking about deep tech here, either the IP has been licensed from university or it is a student-led startup with some very deep technological expertise. And the first initial part of the development works well because they bank on support from the university. They can get funding from non-dilutive funding sources like the SBIR grants. But the moment they get to this threshold where they need to start the studies, right, to get through to the FDA approval, those funding sources that they were depending on initially are not relevant anymore. They need to raise dilutive money, and they're too early and not fully de-risked. And so it's really hard to raise money in that gap. And that is really where we come in, not just because we're providing the funding, but we also fully understand that that is the stage where startups need a lot of help and support that goes way beyond the check, right? And my personal experience, having worked over the last 2 decades with over 150 startups, I leveraged that experience to advise these startups, to support these startups. But then our differentiator, as you very well mentioned, Connor, is not just my experience. We bring such a large ecosystem with us that our startups can leverage that ecosystem to find the mentors, the advisors, the experts, the clinicians, the academics that they need to partner with. Because we all know that you don't build a startup alone. It takes a village, and we've built the village with Amplify MedTech.
I love that. What an asset to have. As you're writing a check, it's almost like you're welcoming the founder into a family that's going to help them cross that bridge. But let's talk about that gap for a moment more, and let's talk about risk. You mentioned de-risking isn't really possible in that stage enough for the traditional VCs. They're going to see it as too risky, and it's a bit too late for the non-dilutive capital. And so they're sitting in this risky middle center. So when you look at founders that are at that stage, how do you de-risk it in your mind? What signals do you look for as you're talking to those founders that indicate to you it could be a winner?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first thing that I look for is product market fit. So when I say product market fit, I want to know that you know exactly what problem you're solving, exactly who you're solving it for. And if you build it, they're going to buy it. And I think that third part is where most startups, need to get to, because they might have done their customer discovery. They might have had their 500 interviews and they know there is an unmet need. But they never ask the question, would you pay for this? If we build it, would you buy it, right? And that is the proof in the pudding, and that's what we're looking for is, do you have a very clear product market fit on your device? Because if you don't, and you start your FDA studies, you're going down the wrong pathway. You're going to spend 2 years and a few $1 million, and then you get FDA approval for an indication that is not ready for your product. So that product market fit is extremely essential at that point. We look for, obviously, the product. How is it transforming healthcare? We're not going into Me Too products. We are not going into incremental technologies. We want technologies that are really transforming healthcare. So how is your product transforming healthcare? Is your product, can you build it? Can you scale it? Is it very well protected? We look at all those aspects of the product, and we want to know that you've de-risked the product, which means that at the early stages, we are iterating on the product a lot. There are lots of versions of the product that come through. And so when you are ready to start your FDA studies, you're at this point where you have a clinical prototype. You've de-risked the early product development. Of course, that will continue. You'll have your alpha, your beta before you get to your commercial, but that's a process of development. And then the last and the most important thing I look for is the team. Is this team going to be able to take this product to success, right? It's not just about, are you an exited founder or something like that? In fact, I want to support new founders a lot. But I look for very specific characteristics in new founders, which is, are you coachable? Are you willing to pivot when it is required? Do you have the long-term vision for this? Are you just thinking about the product development, or do you also have a business strategy that is going to lead your company to a successful exit?
You're speaking so much like a VC that it makes it almost obvious that you start a VC fund. But there must have come a moment where, you're running the network with Amplify, you're working with founders on a one-by-one basis. There must have been a moment where you decide to launch Fay Ventures, where you decide to kick off a VC fund. What was that moment like? What did you see in that opportunity, and what made you decide to sort of press the green button on the process to start a VC fund?
Yeah, so this is a whole new adventure for me. When I started building Amplify MedTech, I was building to solve a need, which was that we didn't have enough MedTech support, and I wanted to create that MedTech support. But as I started building Amplify, I realized that it's not just support that they want. Fundraising is really, really difficult for these startups. And allow me to blow your mind, Connor. Of the 2,200 VC firms that are currently existing, I would say in the US, only 3% invest in MedTech.
Wow.
So this is a real gap, right? This is an industry that currently stands at almost 200 billion. It's growing day by day with AI. MedTech is going to grow exponentially, and we don't have people investing in them. We need this. We really are at an inflection point for healthcare and for MedTech. And I mean, traditionally, MedTech used to be hardware only, things that were implants or things that were used in surgical suites, or maybe, disinfection products. And it was a very niche market, and it made sense. But today, MedTech is very different. Today, MedTech is at the forefront of early diagnosis, of determining what works for what patient and helping to tailor your treatment to that. It is about enabling clinical decision support. It's about patient monitoring. It's about so many aspects. And this field is exploding, and it's going to change how we do healthcare in the next 5 to 10 years. And we need funding to keep these companies building and growing. And that is why it's launched Fay Ventures.
It makes total sense to me. So let's talk about Fay Ventures. On one hand, sometimes when people think about venture capital, they think about Sequoia and Andreessen Horowitz, right? That have maybe $1 billion plus in assets under management. And here comes Fay Ventures, a $1 million seed fund. Can you speak a little bit to what is the opportunity when you are a smaller, more nimble, more hands on the ground focused fund? Kind of looking at these early stage deals, how does a $1 million seed fund navigate in the medtech market?
Yeah, so we are funding those that Sequoia is not ready to fund yet, right? We are getting them ready to go get funding from Sequoia. We are helping them de-risk. We are helping them. We are supporting them not just with checks, but also with advisory, with our ecosystem, so that these startups can build and get the traction that they need so that they can effectively position themselves to get larger checks and to get larger funding, because we're coming in at the seed stage. They're going to go on to raise a Series A and a Series B. And if they have gotten the right traction and the right momentum, it'd be a lot easier for them to attract that follow-on capital.
Excellent. I love it. That should be a pitch for founders everywhere to make sure that your VCs know the industry that they're talking about, because when they get on your cap table early, they're a part of your success in getting to the more famous names later on. So we've focused a lot on the startups. Let's make it a little bit more concrete. What sort of areas within med tech or medical devices do you think are really interesting to look into? If there's going to be some big winners that you find, is it in a certain type of technology or a certain vertical or a certain part of the health industry?
So our thesis is we focus on AI-enabled MedTech. And the reason we focus on AI-enabled MedTech is we were very intentional about creating this this thesis and this direction for investing. Because as I look at the MedTech ecosystem, I would say that 80 to 90% of medtech companies today have a hardware and a software element associated with it. Whether you're doing clinical decision support, whether you're doing digital health, whether you're doing diagnostics, you're going to have some level of software associated with your device, which means that you're going to have data, which means that now you can utilize that data to create meaningful outcomes for patients, to create more personalized detection, treatment, etc. for your patients. And you can create a very viable clinical decision support system for the providers. And startups that have a software component but have not thought about how to utilize the software component to provide better care to patients are missing the boat. I think they're leaving a lot on the table. And that's why we are really focused on AI-enabled MedTech, because this is a founder who is looking into the future, not just today, and seeing where this technology can go and how far they can take it and how much good they can do with this technology to improve healthcare access to patients. And that is really our focus.
Before we recorded this podcast, me and you were talking a little bit about deals. We both come from the deals background, and we love talking about startups, right? And all the founders that we encounter. But of course, as you're raising a VC fund, it's also about LPs. So the limited partners, the investors in your VC fund, who are those people for Fay Ventures? Who are sort of the main groups or the people for whom this vision really resonates?
Yeah. Almost all our LPs are people who are coming from the medtech world. They understand the space. They understand where it's going. They're passionate about it. They want to make a difference. And that's why they are partnering with us, because they align very closely with our vision. So we have people who've, spent maybe years in corporate medtech, or doctors or experts who have been advising startups in this space for years. Those are typically the people that are coming into the fund because they're really excited about what we are building. They really resonate with our thesis. They understand the gap that we are trying to fill, and they see that this is the future of healthcare and they want to get in early.
I love it. And I think you've managed to build that coalition already with Amplify, right? You're building a community of 800 people to support MedTech founders. How does building an LP community sort of draw on some of the skills that you already had in place from building that community?
So it's, everything that we do in this world is about the relationships that we built at the end of the day. Amplify MedTech is all about relations, and my LP network is all about relations as well.
Yeah, I love it. So, one or two more questions, and I wanted to focus one on AI in health. I think there's a lot of misconceptions or concerns about AI in health, and some of these are very justified, I think.
Mhm.
I know you to be an ethical investor and somebody who wants, you've mentioned already, people to be using AI and using new technology for good. What are some of the signals that you look for when you meet founders to really solidify your conviction that they are trying to do good in the health industry versus a founder that might be looking to extract or exploit or use AI in ways that are unethical?
Um, so we are focused on founders that have, that have identified a need because they were really passionate about it, or because they saw somebody go through it. So I'll give you the example of one of the companies that we are very actively evaluating right now. The founder has developed an oculomics company that will use your retina to manage neurological and retinal diseases. Because as we now know, the eye tells you a lot about what's happening in the brain. And they are utilizing that for the early detection management of neurological and retinal diseases. The founder herself was diagnosed with a neurological disease. So she knows firsthand the value that her technology is creating. And she's very passionate about solving this problem, right? So the founders and and what they're building, what their passion is, and why they're building it is very important as we are evaluating these companies.
I love that you brought that up. I find this so important. Sometimes I'm sitting down with entrepreneurs and they say, well, I want to start a startup, but I can't come up with a good idea. Can you help me come up with some ideas? And usually what I end up talking about is the power of lived experience, is trying to
Mm-hmm.
solve a problem that you've really faced. Now, medtech is a little bit more intense of a lived experience if you're trying to solve a disease maybe or a medical problem that you faced yourself. It's a very emotional and intense lived experience. And I'm wondering, with so much experience advising hundreds of startups and within the Amplify network, can you speak a little bit to, have you seen founders with that lived experience outperform, or maybe it's that they have a more emotional connection to the work? What sort of impact do you see with lived experience in founders?
That is such a great question, Connor. So I think what lived experience gives you is perseverance. That is really what differentiates a founder who is passionate about their technology versus a founder who is building a startup because that's the next cool thing to do, right? Because startups are hard. They are very hard. It's going to take up the next 8 to 10 years of your life. You're going to be living, breathing, eating this space. You're probably not going to be drawing as big a paycheck as you would have if you had a corporate job. You're going to sacrifice time with your family, friends, and everything because you're passionate about building this. And if you want to bet on someone who's going to keep going and who's going to get to the finish line, is this person who is passionate about what they're building.
Absolutely. I think one of the best quotes I ever heard from a founder was, if my business went out of business tomorrow, the day after tomorrow, I would start another business focused on the same problem. I would do it in a different way, maybe, if the first one failed, but I'd be working on this the day after my business failed. Or I would take a weekend to relax, and then I'd start focusing on this first thing Monday morning. That type of a founder with that type of a determination, I think, brings a lot to the table that somebody looking at it objectively from a non-emotional standpoint may not always bring, right?
Absolutely. And not everything in medtech has to be a lived experience from a clinical perspective, right? I know someone who's built a company around clinical trials management. And that is because he worked in the NIH and he worked with startups, and he saw that clinical trials management was a mess. Everything was on paper and documentation and managing it, and people's handwritings and all those issues. And then when you're getting ready to file for your FDA approvals, this documentation is what they're looking at. And if this documentation is not in order, it's going to impact your timeline to your FDA approval. And so he built this company. It's not something that he personally lived, as in, it wasn't a disease that he was impacted by, but he saw this problem. So lived experiences can come from different aspects, or it might be somebody that you see, maybe you interact with a population where you see this problem coming up again and again and again, and you want to solve it.
Yeah. Well, I think the really beautiful thing about this conversation is I see your lived experience in witnessing the pain of founders falling in that gap and seeing the ability of you and a community to help them cross that gap makes you create this solution. So I think Fay Ventures is going to be a stunning success because I see the determination behind you. If it didn't work today, you'd start it again tomorrow. So Fehmida, I really appreciate you coming and telling the story and having a really nice chat. It was really great to hear a little bit about your journey.
Thank you so much for having me, Connor. It was really a pleasure speaking with you.
My pleasure, Fehmida. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.